Hey everybody, my name is Ben Baby. I cover the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN's NFL Nation. I'm here with Brooke Pryor, who covers the Steelers for NFL Nation. We just watched the Bengals beat the Pittsburgh Steelers 37-30. Brooke, you said this was a weird game from the Pittsburgh Steelers' point of view. What kind of made it feel that way for you?
You know, it's weird because the Steelers scored 30 points. That's the most they've scored all season, and yet they lost. And this defense, which had TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick played, they gave up 37 points. And yet it didn't feel like they played horribly by any means. It was very much a weird game, a weird outcome. The first half, I thought the Steelers looked pretty good. Second half, they just couldn't make adjustments. The offense couldn't get the same rhythm that they had in the first half. They were not good on third down, and it kind of fell apart there after halftime.
Yeah, you know, this was a game where the Bengals trailed, 23-20. It looked like the Steelers couldn't do anything wrong offensively in that first half. We saw TJ Watt have a big interception against Joe Burrow. Now he's got 2 picks against Burrow this year, and Burrow was asked after the game, you know, is there anything you can do about that? And he just kind of shrugged. He says, unfortunately, there's not. You know, TJ Watt, it's almost like he's the reigning defensive player of the year, almost.
Weird how that works.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one of those throws that all of a sudden I see the ball leave Joe Burrow's hands, and then I see TJ Watt on the ground. And I was like, that's weird. Where'd the ball go? And sure enough, on replay, TJ Watt just jumps up and snatches it out of the air because that's how he plays. That's the difference that the Steelers defense was missing while he was out, that torn pectoral that he sustained in week 1 against the Bengals at the end of regulation in that game. And I think the concerning and the weird thing for the Steelers defense is that Watt was back as a whole. There wasn't one area of deficiency, and yet they still had a similar result to some of the other games that they've lost where they gave up big plays. I think Burrow had at least 5, or at least the Bengals had at least 5 plays that went for more than 20 yards. Those big plays, TJ Watt being on the field didn't stop those from happening.
Yeah, you know, I thought that when you looked at the game, the difference was definitely defensively for the Bengals and offensively for Pittsburgh there in the second half. You know, we were counting them in the press box, how many 3-and-outs the Bengals were getting, because there were some squabbles in the press box about how good the Bengals defense. I said, guys, they just had 2 straight 3-and-outs and then just kept racking up there. And there were 3, then there were 4. The Bengals even got a stop after that interception in the second half. You know, spinning this big picture, obviously we know the Steelers likely not making the playoffs this year. It's about establishing what they have in quarterback Kenny Pickett. What did you see from Kenny tonight that kind of maybe yields to his, or portends to a long-term projection on how he could be as a starter moving forward the rest of the year?
The good news is he has a second straight game without throwing an interception, without turning the ball over. That's progress because that's something that he was not doing early on. He was not taking care of the football, and that's something that was brought up time and time again. You also saw him taking some shots down the field. He wasn't connecting on all of them, though. It's hard to tell if it was a mechanics problem, a miscommunication problem. He had a couple times George Pickens was wide open. One time George Pickens there at the end dropped the ball. It would have been a touchdown. But in the first half, I believe it was, Kenny Pickett Pickens got behind the Bengals defense, and Pickett unloaded, and the throw, he badly missed Pickens, but Pickens also got tripped up in the end zone. So there are just these miscues, and I don't know if it's a lack of chemistry, a lack of time together, all of these things that I think are growing pains that Pickett's going to have to work through. But, I mean, if you're the Steelers, you like the mobility that he showed, his ability on the design runs. I think his decision-making is getting better. He threw it away sometimes other times he may have held it for a sack. And I think that he's showing growth, but it's not there yet. And they knew that this was going to be a year in development, and that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, Joe Burrow talked about how tough the conditions were tonight. It's great. If you can't tell, we're freezing down here. Brooke's got gloves. You can't see my hands on camera, but I don't have any gloves. It's a little cold down here, and it was windy. We saw a field goal go in that direction from Evan McPherson, who's got a leg, and it died down. That shows you how much wind there was. Joe Burrow talked about the wind conditions. He praised Kenny Pickett and said after the game that he kind of told him kind of keep doing what you're doing, and thought that Pickett played well. And we know what that's like to see these young quarterbacks have that progression. The Steelers beat up on Burrow a lot that first year, and in that second year, you start to see it kind of click a little bit. And Burrow talked about the resources that Kenny has around him in a guys like George Pickens. You have Najee Harris. From a fantasy perspective, I'm curious. Now that we talked a little bit in the press box, Chase Claypool no longer here. maybe it's guys who have you have guys like Pat Freiermuth who are now going to be maybe viewed a little bit more favorably in this offense from a fantasy perspective, from a target share standpoint. Where do you feel like Pat's target share is like, especially for people now that we're getting closer to the playoffs? You're going to be making a lot of those tight decisions. Maybe you've got a second flex option. Maybe you've got a second tight end option. Where do you feel like those targets are going to be like moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got Pat Freiermuth, he's a start to me every week. Today he had 12 targets. That's a career high. And that's exactly kind of what we thought would happen once Claypool got traded. Freiermuth becomes the guy over the middle of the field. He and Kenny Pickett have a really great chemistry. To me, I think continue to look for that connection between the two of them. Pickens, another favorite of Kenny Pickett. But if I'm a Deontay Johnson fantasy manager, that's where I get a little bit concerned. Kenny Pickett said today that the reason that Deontay Johnson only had 5 targets was because that he wasn't getting singled up enough. Just the coverage was dictating that, and that maybe they need to move him around more to get him more involved. But Johnson was clearly frustrated because there were a couple times that it looked like he was open and Pickett just didn't see him, went somewhere else. So I'm a little bit concerned if I have Deontay Johnson. But man, if you've got George Pickens or Pat Freiermuth, even Najee Harris, this run game is looking a lot better. Najee's had his best 2 games of the season since the bye week, had 99 yards last week, 90 yards this week, including 2 touchdowns, and that jump, that leap over Jesse Bates where he took off from about the 4-yard line, landed in the end zone. He was asked about it in the locker room, said, did you get a chance to look at the replay and just kind of admire that? And he said, bro, like, how long have you seen me play? I do this. This is what I do. Also, I imagine he's not in a real mood to reminisce on that play when you've just lost 37-30. But Najee Harris is definitely hitting his stride. So I feel good if you had those 3 guys. Deontay Johnson, maybe not so much.
If you're have some Bengals players, it was a great week. If you had Joe Mixon in week 9, week 11, not so much. Mixon not only has a concussion, his backup scores 3 touchdowns in this game. We did not get any updates about Mixon's long-term prognosis and what his availability will be like. That will be something to watch as we go through the week. I know that there was a lot of chatter in 2020 about Mixon's injury status. There was, or may or may not have been, a Joe Mixon update account floating around on Twitter. I don't know who had that account. We've got to find that person. However, we'll see if you have some Samaje Perine, or if you don't have him, you might want to hit those waiver wires. You saw if Mixon is going to be out, you saw that the Bengals offense can function well they found different ways to do it a lot through the air, but Perine has rushed really well. Travion Williams got some reps there. Chris Evans, who normally is a third running back, was inactive, was battling injuries throughout the week, but we'll see what happens with that position long term. We saw T. Higgins have a big day, over 100 yards. I believe ESPN Stats and Info said since 2020 has the same number of 100-yard receiving games as Jamar Chase, who could be back as early as next week. We saw that our Jeremy Fowler reported that potentially Chase could be back as soon as that Week 12 game against the Tennessee Titans. That may track with what we've seen, given the fact they didn't put Jamar Chase on IR. And if you're looking at it from the Bengals' perspective, this will be a good time to get him back. You're going in facing a Titans team that has been hot, leading their division, a team that you're going to have to go through if you want to make the playoffs. The Bengals, very familiar with that, having beaten Tennessee in the divisional round last year. And if they want to get back to that postseason, they're going to have to do that. Meanwhile, in Pittsburgh, you're looking at 2023 potentially being a playoff year. 2022, those odds
Not so much. I don't think they're great.
Just like my hands, I'm not feeling them. And so, in that note, we're going to wrap things up. So please keep it locked on ESPN's YouTube page. It's NFL on ESPN and on the website. For Brooke Pryor, for myself, thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.